A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. As-salatu was-salam ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Rabbi zidni ilman. So, assalamu alaikum everyone. Our reflection today is called Learn to Love What is Good for You, and it is from chapter 2, Surah Baqarah, verse 216. Now, in our last reflection, we spoke about the rebellion against the self, how sometimes our own impulses work against our flourishing. Today's verse from Surah Baqarah takes us one step deeper. And it says, and this is part of the verse, and it may be that you dislike a thing while it is good for you. And it may be that you love a thing while it is evil for you. And Allah knows while you do not know. So in this verse, Allah reminds us of a profound truth. Human perception is limited and our internal preferences are not always trustworthy, especially when it comes to things or commands that quote unquote don't make sense to us in the moment or feel too hard. We react towards them, right? So we may detest the verses saying something that holds hidden benefits or long for something that harms us. And so this verse is an invitation. It's an invitation to trust, to surrender to God and His infinite wisdom, and to cultivate a mindset of growth by embracing discomfort. This realization, which is deeply embedded in Islamic teachings, is also supported by psychological research and contemporary discussions on resilience and discomfort. So the idea that our instincts about what is good or bad for us are very often short-sighted. We love staying in bed, for example, when our well-being lies in going for a walk, going to work, etc. Human beings love comfort, and those who succeed in life recognize that this love of comfort cannot stand in the way of functioning and achievement. So in order to pursue well-being, for example, we need a willingness to embrace discomfort. And, this year we've been reflecting on the idea that Allah has proportioned the soul and inspired it with His moral direction. We've talked about the inner compass and the fitrah that points us towards right. But here's the thing, often the compass points us towards something that feels hard in the moment. Here are just some examples of what we do not feel like doing. And I'm speaking only about myself for now. We don't feel like getting up in the morning, especially when it's cold outside, right? We don't feel like apologizing because our ego just gets in the way. We don't feel like exercising because we're tired or something hurts. We don't feel like having that honest conversation because it'll be too awkward. We don't feel like being patient, right? So it turns out that our nafs prefers comfort over growth, even though that is the prime directive to our soul, is growth actualizing our full potential. Right. And I had read something about by Stephen Covey decades ago, and it really stood with me, right? Which is that success is often not about mind over matter, but rather mind over mattress, right? It is that getting up, that doing the hard things that stands in the way. So many times we have good ideas and we cannot make them happen because our love of comfort, gets in the way. So modern psychology also confirms what the Qur'an told us centuries ago, which is that we're terrible at predicting what will make us truly happy. Researchers call this affective forecasting error, which simply means that we overestimate how good certain pleasures will feel and underestimate how meaningful disciplined effort will be. There's a great book by Michael Easter called The Comfort Crisis, and he argues that modern life has removed the very struggles that human beings are meant to handle and solve. We have optimized for convenience, for temperature control, instant entertainment, food delivery, endless scrolling, all of this, right? And yet it's not making us happy. Rates of anxiety, depression, dissatisfaction with life have soared, and we've all experienced this within our circles, if not personally. Similarly, in another book, Sitting Kills, Moving Heals, the author explains that something that feels pleasant at the moment, such as sitting for long periods, really actively harms the body over time. Our biology was designed for movement. even though sitting feels more comfortable. It's strange, right? So while stillness may feel easier, it is actually movement that builds health. And this is exactly what verse 216 is teaching us. Your immediate liking is not a reliable guide to your long-term good. And this is, friends, exactly why we need the wisdom of Scripture, why we need Allah's infinite wisdom and knowledge, right? So, much of what we are used to calling following our heart in present days is often just following immediate relief, right? Sleeping feels good. That's following our heart in the moment, right? Avoiding conflict feels easier. Believe me, yes, it does. Indulging feels soothing, right? Procrastinating reduces anxiety, but we know only temporarily, right? But the Quranic worldview invites us to ask a deeper question. Are my preferences and actions aligned with who I am meant to become? Not only what feels good in the moment. So sometimes what we resist is exactly what we need and what extends our capacity. And we have so many examples of this with people who succeed, right? An athlete, for example, pushes through training discomfort every day, all day. A student who wants to succeed pushes through that mental strain, that tiredness, that call to do something more interesting in the moment, right? A believer prays even when distracted. Our faith has so many practices built in that extend us, that help us build discipline, right? So, and we take all of these for granted, right? Most of us, no matter what we struggle with, in what other areas of our life we may be struggling, we still manage to pray, right? So at some point in our lives, we do have that skill set of the discipline of getting up, even though it may be very cold in the morning, and we may be very tired, but we still manage to get up, right? Um, so, the soul basically expands through what the body or ego resists, right? And Ramadan is perhaps the clearest lived example of this verse. Abstaining from food and drink and desire seems difficult, and yet it cultivates discipline and gratitude and spiritual elevation. It forces us to challenge our assumptions about what we need and teaches us that true fulfillment does not come from indulgence, but from self control and devotion. At the end of Ramadan, no matter how challenging it has been, we end up feeling really good about ourselves, that we have actually gotten somewhere. So when we're, experiencing hunger, we might momentarily think, I hate this. But by the time we break our fast, inshallah, we realize how much stronger we may have become. And so Ramadan is proof that what seems difficult can be deeply nourishing for the soul. In line with what we've been discussing, this month recalibrates our inner GPS. It teaches us that urges are not commands, that discomfort is not danger, or like one of my health coaches used to tell me, hunger is not an emergency and does not demand a response. So, Ramadan reminds us that even though we have been indulging the nafs the whole year round, it can be retrained. Embracing temporary discomfort turns out to be a gateway to profound ease. And over time, we can learn to love that which is good for us. So, how do we do this? How do we learn to love what is good rather than submit to momentary pleasures and comforts? Now, when we rebel against a higher self by repeatedly choosing what is easy or what is right, we do slowly dull the compass. And when we begin to take baby steps to choose what aligns with growth, we can recalibrate it. And so over time, something beautiful happens. And those who are committed to working out, for example, have already experienced this, right? We begin to love what is good for us. The early morning prayer becomes cherished, it becomes our personal time with our Lord. movement becomes energizing. And how many of us have not wanted to work out? And then when we do, when we get into it, we realize that it's actually giving us energy rather than depleting. Honest conversation becomes so relieving. They lift a burden on our psyche and our soul, right? Self control becomes empowering. We feel good about ourselves, right? So the discomfort, in other words, shrinks as we begin to experience the fruits of discipline. And this is how we learn to love what is good for us, by actually engaging in the discipline to get there. So, you know, what are some of like some practices that we can do, right? First of all, reframing hardships. When we are faced with a challenge, we can ask ourselves, is this something I'm resisting simply because it is uncomfortable? Could it be reshaping me for the better? And trust Allah's wisdom. Keep coming back to this, right? Allah knows and you do not know. Allah knows and you do not know. He created you with love and mercy. And so when something, doesn't go our way, we can remind ourselves that we have limited perception, that He sees the whole terrain, the map of my life, and what I need to succeed, even though I may not want it in the moment. And we can learn to embrace discomfort intentionally. This is the secret of those who have self-discipline, right? They actually take on challenges, right? People who love working out, I have seen them. uh, they challenge themselves to run the 5 miles and then the 10 miles or the 10K and the 5K. um, and it brings them so much joy, right? So in terms of our spirit and our soul, small acts of voluntary hardship, like fasting outside of Ramadan, right? Waking up for tahajjud. So, if there's one thing we can do to take our spirituality to the next level, friends, it's this: it is waking up for tahajjud. So, all of these things can help us endure life's bigger challenges. And another, practice which all psychologists talk about is choose what benefits your future self. So every decision we make shapes the person we become, right? In other words, if I choose to work out today, I am being kind to my future self in terms of stronger muscles and bones and all of that, right? So opt for habits and choices that build a better, stronger, wiser version of yourself rather than indulging in temporary ease at the cost of long term growth. We can pick one spiritual practice that seems challenging and commit to it, reminding ourselves of this verse, right? So may this Ramadan really help us not just endure what is good for us, but learn to love it. Learn to love the hunger pangs, learn to love the discipline that we are able to exercise during the month. And as he says at the end, Allah knows, including what is good for us, and you do not know. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.